Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Hello, everyone. Today is September the 5th, 2025. I am in New York, and I have the great privilege of having this conversation with a person I have admired for a long, long time, Walter Clark, Professor Walter Aaron Clark. He is a musicologist, and I think he's joining me from California, where he lives and teaches and develops most of his activities, of which we're going to get a little insight today. How are you, Walter?
Well, I'm doing just fine, and I'm very happy to be with you today, Antoni. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you. It's a great honor because
Yeah,
I have long
well,
admired your work and the
thank you so
important strides
much.
that you have made in the study of heritage that we both cherish.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so we're going to have this is a very spontaneous conversation,
Right?
so we can talk about anything, but I always like to ask, and I'm always curious about your upbringing. And
Yes.
so, where did you grow up?
All right. Let's not talk about the Dodgers or the Yankees. We're agreed on that. We'll start with my upbringing. Now, it might seem odd that a Hispanist like myself has a name that has absolutely nothing to do with the Hispanic world. Walter Aaron Clark. My ancestry is Northern European, and I was named after my grandfather. I grew up in Minnesota. I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, spent the first 19 years of my life there. So, this is a rather unusual sequence of life events. Um, that have led me to this point, but that's just fine. Why would someone born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with the name Walter Aaron Clark become a Hispanist?
Good
Well,
question.
why not? I love beauty. I always have loved beauty in art and literature and music and so on. And the Hispanic world, the Luso Hispanic world, flourishes with great achievements in all of those areas. So why wouldn't I be attracted to the intrinsic beauty of this legacy? But here's what happened. Here's why I'm sitting here talking to you today. When I was 12, the Beatles landed in 1964, and I was blown away by the Beatles, as were so many other people, and I wanted to learn to play the guitar, like George Harrison. Chuck Berry was another hero of mine. So I started taking rock guitar lessons. About 2 years after that, when I was 14, I came to my lesson one day, and my teacher was doing this. Bum brum brum bum bum brum brum bum bum brum brum bum bum brum brum bum bum. And I felt like Paul on the road to Damascus. I had had a vision of truth. And that's what I wanted. I wanted that. Forget rock, forget country. I mean, I was a huge fan of Chet Atkins too. Country style finger picking and all of that. It's great music. These were great musicians. No doubt about that. Chuck Berry, George Harrison, Chet Atkins. All my heroes were great musicians, but that's what I wanted. And I said, teach me that. And he said, well, I can, but that's all I know. It turns out that he was playing a sort of guitar arrangement of Ernesto Lecuona's famous Malagueña. He said, that's all I know. But he said, you're in luck. Someone has just come back from Spain who is studying flamenco guitar with Luis Maravilla, one of the great masters. And you should get in touch with him. His name was Michael Hauser, another improbable name. So I got in touch with Michael Hauser. I went to a concert, an open air concert that he was giving that summer, and spoke with him afterwards. I knew that's what I wanted to do. He'd been playing flamenco and all kinds of enchanting pieces, and I said, I want to study with you. And so he accepted me as a student. So at age 14 already, I was learning, the first thing I learned was sevillanas, then we did soleares and bulerías and alegrías and tientos and tanzamora and all kinds of things that he had learned from Luis Maravilla. The other thing that happened was that there was a Spanish woman named Maria Fernanda who had danced in Antonio's company and then married an American and moved to Minneapolis. And she gave flamenco dance classes, and also she and Michael Hauser formed the nucleus of a Spanish dance company in the land of the beer barrel polka, of all places. And so I also learned how to accompany dancing. But it soon became clear to me that if I wanted to be a capable accompanist, I should probably learn how to dance myself. So I began to take flamenco dance lessons in my office at work at the university. I have a picture of me dancing the sevillanas in a concert when I was 17 in 1969, the same year that human beings first landed on the moon. I was
I've
dancing
seen
the
that photo.
sevillanas. Huh?
I have seen the photo.
Oh, you have seen that photo. So there I am. I still have those castanets, which are on the wall of my office. And I remember I actually took flamenco dance with a different person, George Benarens, who directed a group, and I danced with his group. But anyway, he would order special flamenco dance boots for us. And what we would do is we'd put our foot on a piece of paper, he'd draw an outline, and then send it off to Mexico where they made the boots. And when he was drawing the outline of my foot, he said, they'll think that Paul Bunyan has taken up flamenco dance because I have big feet. So this was a very improbable background. But I began to study not only flamenco guitar, but also classical guitar. So I'd spend my free time practicing not only sevillanas and soleares, but also 16th century vihuela music by Miguel de Fuenllana and Narvaez in Milan, and so on and so forth, and also guitar pieces by Villalobos and Ponce, and et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
So the circuitous course of my life in those years, in my teens and early 20s, eventually led me to the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. And I studied with a Mexican guitarist there, Jesus Silva, and I performed in a master class for Andres Segovia. And then my faltering footsteps eventually led me to Southern California, where I did a master's degree with Pepe Romero at the University of California in San Diego. I got a 2-year Fulbright grant to study in West Germany with a lutenist, and I studied early music of the 16th and 17th centuries. I learned how to read tablatures so I could do better arrangements of that early music on the guitar. My experience in Europe, though, I made a point of traveling around Europe. My brother encouraged me to spend my inheritance. My parents passed away during that time. He encouraged me to spend my inheritance, such as it was, on traveling through Europe. So I did. And it reawakened my love of art and history and literature and architecture and so on and so forth. And I realized that I got to be very good on the guitar, but I was never going to be an international concert artist. As one of my German friends said, Walter, the train has left the station. And he was right. I was good, but I wasn't quite good enough. But at the same time, I realized I didn't want to be a performer. I needed to find a way to combine my love of culture and history with my love of music. Where did those two vectors intersect? They intersected in musicology. And where should I study musicology? The University of California at Los Angeles had one of the leading Hispanists in the world. His name was Robert Murrell Stevenson. So I applied to UCLA, was accepted, and finally, for the first time in my life, I realized I was in the right place doing the right thing, that I could succeed at this and feel happy and satisfied and fulfilled and maybe make a contribution of some kind. And I wanted to write on something related to the guitar, maybe something on Francisco Tárrega or Isaac Albéniz. But I thought, I'll never get a job. Nobody's going to hire somebody who specializes in Tárrega or Albéniz. I remember talking to one of my professors, a very eminent authority on Italian Renaissance music and a rather traditional musicologist. And I said, I'm afraid this is what I want to do, but I'm afraid that I'll be unemployable if I do that. And he said words that changed my life. He said, Walter, that may be true, but the tragedy is, if you don't do it, who will? And in that moment, all doubt just melted away. I thought, damn it, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it because it's what I believe in, and it's because it's what I'm passionate about. And that made all the difference. And when I said this to Stevenson, he said, well, it's wide open. And he was right. So I loved the music of Albéniz. I realized, though, that if I pigeonholed myself as a guitarist, yes, it might not be the best professional move. But what I came to discover after I began to research Albéniz was that he wrote operas. So I thought, well, opera is a more mainstream sort of genre, and this is interesting to me. I did not know that. So I wrote a dissertation focused on his Spanish-style opera, Pepita Jimenez, and his other operas as well. That laid the foundation for a biography. I remember going to the American Musicological Society's national meeting, and the various publishers have exhibits there, and you can meet with the editors and talk about possible projects. I went to the editor at Cambridge University Press, which is a wonderful press, and I'm doing a major project with them right now. So no slur intended, but I said, well, I'm thinking of writing a biography of Albéniz. I've laid the foundation of my dissertation, and there is no biography in English. Shouldn't we have one? And she got this sort of condescending look on her face and said, well, he's a rather marginal figure, isn't he? And at that moment, I said, thanks for taking the time to talk to me. Bye. I went over to Oxford to their booth, and the editor there was very receptive. He said, oh, I already asked somebody to do this, but you're so much further along. I'll have you do it and have him do something else. Bingo. So before I even graduated from the doctoral program, I had a contract with Oxford University Press for the first major biography of Albéniz in the English language.
Yeah.
The following year, I was approached by Garland Publishing. They had a series of books, guides to research, and they had found out about my dissertation and wanted me to do one on Albéniz. So by the time I had my first job, I got a full-time tenure-track job a year after I graduated from the PhD program at UCLA. I had 2 books under contract, both on Albéniz. What happened next? Well, when I was doing my research in Barcelona at the Museo de la Música, which is a phenomenal resource, I was going through all these documents on Albéniz, but Albéniz and Granados were close friends. And sort of the two sides of the same coin of Spanish nationalism in music around 1900. And but it was very hard work and going through all of these documents and so on. And I remember thinking at the time, don't do Granados. You're not going to do that. You're finishing with Albéniz and that's it. But of course I couldn't keep that resolution. This was the next logical step when I was done with Albéniz. I already had a contract for a book on Granados. So then I did Granados. After that, my friend Bill Krause invited me to join him in writing a book on Moreno Torroba, who wrote a lot of beautiful music for the guitar, but he was best known as a composer of great zarzuelas, Spanish operettas, Luisa Fernanda, and several others that are perennial favorites. Um, and then my teacher, Pepe Romero, invited me to write a book about his remarkable family. The Romero Quartet, of course, is internationally famous, the first important guitar quartet in history. And so I wrote a book about the Romeros. And then, having all of these books have been translated into Spanish, at some point, the daughter of Joaquin Rodrigo invited me to write a biography of her father, I invited I consider him to be the leading Rodrigo expert, Javier Suarez Pajares, professor at the Complutense University in Madrid. Invited him to join me, so we co-authored this book. I also wrote a book on Rodrigo for the Routledge series, the research and information guides. So um, now, after all of these years, I've written these biographies. And why did I focus on biographies? Because I've always liked historical biographies. There's nothing more interesting to me than a human life. And what is the history of music? It's the history of music made by human beings. So if you want to understand this music, you need to understand the people who made it. And for me, I wanted to understand the Spanish music that I loved best from the middle of the 19th century to the modern era. And basically, that's what I did. I started with Albéniz, then he was born in 1860, then Granados, born in 1867, the Moreno Torroba, and the Romeros, and then Rodrigo. So kind of going in chronological order up to the present time. And I just finished helping Pepe write his memoirs, which were published by University of Rochester Press. So um, it's been quite an adventure, and
Well,
I have learned what I wanted to know. I did what I did not because I'm an expert, but because I wanted to become an expert, and I learned what I wanted to know. So it's been a very satisfying and fulfilling journey. But at the same time, I've been able to share what I've learned with others who also want to know. And so I've made a contribution in a way that I couldn't have if I'd just been yet another guitarist trying to play the Concierto de Aranjuez by Rodrigo. It's been done.
yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for this um,
Sorry, rather long-winded,
very
but
vivid journey, description of a journey, this Lebenslauf, as they
yes, a
say.
Lebenslauf, exactly.
Yeah, and you have concentrated on as you said, you've done a lot of things, but a big chunk of your scholarship is biographical writing. Huh?
Yes,
Yeah, and the thing is that being a Hispanist, you being a Hispanist, is that we used to say in Spain that in Spain there is a lack of biographical studies. There are no good biographies of major figures. For example, Cervantes, Albéniz, blah, 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 etc. Now, this was true maybe before, now it's not true, obviously. But when you started writing about Albéniz and Granados 25 years ago, maybe more, uh, there were many good papers on Albéniz and Granados, individual papers on very small specific topics.
yes.
But there was not a Lebenslauf of Albéniz. And
Well,
maybe you wrote it because you were finding that book and you said, okay, if it's not there, I need to write this.
that's a very good point. It's important to realize that Spanish musicology today is flourishing.
Yes.
There is a small army of really outstanding Spanish musicologists, especially young ones, and they're as good as musicologists anywhere else. But it's important to understand that until the early 1990s, you could not get a doctorate in musicology at a Spanish university. You got a doctorate in philology or some such. So there wasn't as much research being done as one might have expected. And the other thing was this, that the biographies that had been written of Albéniz were not critical at all. They just tended to believe whatever the previous biographer had said. And this led to all kinds of contradictions because the truth was, as I discovered, that Albéniz fibbed about himself to make himself seem a little more grand to the journalists of his time, which was common practice in the Romantic era. I called it Portrait of the subtitle is Portrait of a Romantic. He was a very romantic artist in that sense. He tended to exaggerate details of his life history just because that would impress people, and it was important to do that. um, so what I discovered was that the earlier biographies had not taken a critical approach. They didn't look seriously at his music, tended to be very dismissive of his stage works, etc., etc. But as I went through boxes and boxes and boxes of letters and diaries and manuscripts and so on, I came to realize, no, they have not gotten this right. there's a there's a different story and a more interesting and a more important story to be told here. Now, what you said about the Spanish biographies is interesting because after the book was published by Oxford University Press in 1999, I approached a Spanish publisher about a possible translation. And they said to me, yes, biographies are something we don't do very well in Spain. And I wondered why that was, because Spanish scholars are brilliant and they have access to all of this documentation and they're as smart and as capable as anybody else. Why not? Because my hypothesis is that there's a long tradition of writing books about saints, hagiography. You don't say bad things about saints. Um, so basically, when they would write a biography of Albéniz or Granados or Rodrigo, they were writing about a saint. So they said only things that would be favorable, and they didn't go into a lot of analytical detail because that would turn off casual readers. But the book was translated into Spanish, and I'll never forget. I was at the Casa del Libro in downtown Madrid. It's this wonderful, huge bookstore. I was standing in line to buy a book, and the person in front of me had a copy of my Albéniz biography in Spanish translation. And I struck up a conversation and I said, oh, by the way, I happen to be the author of that book. Oh, really? Yes, I'm buying this for my brother-in-law. And I said, well, I'll be happy to sign it for you. That was one of the high points in my career, but it also persuaded me that perhaps I was able to make a contribution where one needed to be made. Now, there are plenty of Spanish scholars who can do this sort of thing without my assistance, Javier being one of them, but we teamed up because it was going to be in
Yes.
English for Norton, and now it's going to be published in Spanish.
Yeah.
But anyway, so one thing led to another, but it's been quite a journey, and I'm happy to have been able to make a contribution. And now I know that there's a younger generation of musicologists who are fully capable of carrying on, and I can uh, fade from view, which I'm planning to retire in the next year, two at the most, and I want to finish up the projects I'm currently working on, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Yeah. You already mentioned a little bit this, but maybe you could expand this point. How was it for you, a person with your last name Clark, and your main education in the United States, then to go to Spain and to confront, so to speak, the Spanish scholars? How were you received? Were you received? I mean, I know the answer. You were very well received in my, but mm, but was that were you a little bit anxious about that? Eventually, a good reception, but were you anxious about that?
Well, there's an old saying, confidence is the feeling you have before you understand the situation.
Wow, yeah,
You're asking great questions, by the way. So, no, I wasn't anxious because I didn't know what to expect. I'd already traveled in Spain. I'd traveled throughout Europe when I was on the Fulbright in the from 84 to 86, but now I went back to Spain in 1990 to spend several months there, half a year on fellowship doing my doctoral research, which took me not only to Spain, but also to, because Albanian had this international career. So I also did research in London and Brussels and Prague and Leipzig and Paris and Barcelona and Madrid. It took me all over the place.
mhm,
Oh, how terrible. But here's the thing, and I'm so happy you asked that question because I want to say this. The Spanish scholars there were wonderfully supportive and helpful. One person in particular, Jacinto Torres,
sure,
who was, I think, the leading expert on Albanian and has published the definitive catalog of his works. He was wonderfully helpful to me and supportive and encouraging, as were others. And whenever I went to a library or an archive or a private collection, they were very happy to help me. The granddaughter of Albania invited me to her home outside of Barcelona, and she showed me his collection of abanicos, of fans, and also books and some scores that she had. She donated most of his archive to the to libraries in Barcelona, but she still had a few items, and she shared those with me, and also her personal insights and recollections. So why was that? Okay, well, I mean, one could chalk it up just to the amiability and the generosity of the Spanish people. Um, but I think too that at that time, at least, they were pleased and um, happy to help a foreign scholar, somebody who was taking an interest in their culture. Hello, music history isn't just about Germany and Italy and France. There are these peripheral areas, Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, the British Isles, and Iberia, that historiographically tended to be left on the margins, even as they were somewhat on the margins geographically. So here's a scholar from UCLA, from the University of California, um, a young white guy with a name like Walter Clark, and but he's interested in our culture, in our history, in our music, in our composers. Um, and I think that they were pleased and keen to help me, and they did. I couldn't have gotten to first base without their help, but everywhere I went, they were supportive and helpful, and my colleagues there, like Jacinto Torres, who remains a very dear friend to this day. I couldn't have done it without them, and I never miss an opportunity to let them know. I could
absolutely.
never have done it without their
And
help.
and you've written on Albeniz, Granados, the Romero family, Federico Moreno Torro,
Moreno Torroba,
um,
Joaquin Rodrigo.
Joaquin Rodrigo. If you had all the time in the world, who would be the next one in that list? Maybe you already have started that biography.
All
But,
right,
but even if you have not started, who would be at that
all right.
level of deserving an international biography by an international scholar, something that can be the doorstopper kind of, that everyone has to start when there is interest on that composer, you have to start there and then go someplace else, but start there.
Okay. In my personal opinion as a musicologist, and it's just an opinion, after the passing of Joaquin Rodrigo, I think Paco de Lucia was the most important of Spanish musicians.
Yeah.
His rumba gitana, basically, Entre Dos Aguas, It's one of the most influential pieces of not just flamenco, but popular music of the
Yes,
last 50
yes,
years.
yes.
There was a time when you couldn't go to any Mexican restaurant without hearing the Gypsy Kings doing basically um, some variation on Entre dos Aguas. If I were 30 years younger, and if a wonderful Spanish musicologist weren't already working on this, I would probably write a biography of Paco de Lucia.
Fair
But
enough.
but that's but here's the thing. During the and this is the first time I've told anyone this, but during the the COVID pandemic, I was teaching my courses online, spending a lot of time at home. I like Hollywood movies from the golden age, from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, with Gene Kelly and Sid Cerise and Fred Astaire and Jane Powell, and I watched a lot of those. But there's a Spanish musician who was not just a musician, but also an actor. In one movie, he actually played the romantic lead, and his name was Jose Iturbi.
I knew, I knew you were going to say that.
And he had a sister, Amparo Iturbi. And I kept coming across their names doing my Rodrigo research because they were from Valencia and they knew Rodrigo and he knew them. They eventually found their way to Hollywood and they appeared in several Hollywood movies from that golden age, not just playing the piano, which they did incredibly well, but Iturbi was also a very accomplished conductor, and so they show him conducting, but he was also a very good actor. And he appeared in several movies as an actor. And if I were going to write another full-fledged biography, it would probably be of the Iturbis. You have to write about both of them. You can't just do one. I might do an article on selected movies that he did, various aspects of those movies, how they represent Spain, Spain itself being a sort of emblem of European high culture. Um, so that's an idea that interests me. And since I live here and all the Hollywood archives are just an hour and a half away by car, and I've done research there before. Years ago, I edited a collection of essays on Latin American popular music. And I wrote my chapter on the Hollywood movies of Carmen Miranda, which I love. And I did research at the Margaret Herrick Library in Beverly Hills. And I'd love to go back there and research Jose Iturbi and his sister Amparo Iturbi. So I may well do that. I mean, I do have also a keen interest in Latin American music. I co-edited a major textbook published by Norton on music of Latin America. I teach courses on music of Latin America. And
I've
the reason
taught
for this is that,
that
huh?
class with that book here in New York
Oh, really?
a few years ago.
Oh, how wonderful. Well, and the reason
Very
is that
useful
as a
for the
guitarist,
students. The students appreciated very much
oh,
that textbook.
really? Oh, that's wonderful news. Thank you. Well, the reason being that as a guitarist growing up, and as I said before, I'd come home from school, go into my bedroom and practice. And what did I practice? Well, Fuñana, Bihuela music of the 16th century, but also Villalobos and Ponce, and then practice my soleares. And um, it just seemed to me that there was an uninterrupted continuum of musical greatness here, that you didn't have to confine yourself to one place. And it wasn't a good idea to do that because they're all connected. And if you want to understand the music of Brazil, you need to understand the music of Portugal. If you want to understand the music of Peru or Argentina, you need to know something about music of Spain. And as it turns out, if you want to understand flamenco, you better know something about Latin American music, because it's this concept of ida y vuelta. It's a sort of round trip. Stuff would come from Spain, go to Latin America, be transformed, and come back. If you play a saraband, well, that came from Latin America as the zarabanda. Chacon, the first chacons were chaconas, and they also came from Latin America. So it seemed to me that in order to understand the music of Spain or any other place, I needed to get a better grasp of the entire heritage that stretches around the world, the Philippines as well. So, and as a guitarist, I could do that. Why couldn't I do that as a musicologist? There's no law against it. And so, as a consequence, when I interviewed for the job at the University of California in Riverside in 2003, after spending 10 years at the University of Kansas, I interviewed for this job. They were looking for a musicologist who had strengths in Latin American music because they wanted to build up a focus in their program on that area, which is logical here. So I got the job and I told them that I wanted to establish a center for Iberian and Latin American music. And there was a reason for that because I don't separate Latin American and Iberia. I try to take a holistic approach. They're all part of one larger legacy. And that includes Southeast Asia too, and the Philippines. We have a Philippine rondalla ensemble. Well, as a guitarist, I learned to play in it. And I also learned to play the charango and play in our Andean ensemble because I want to understand. It's just, it's not because I'm an expert, it's because I want to become an expert. So we established the center and we have organized numerous conferences and concerts and individual speakers. And we have a website and we publish an online journal that's run by the
Diagonal.
University of California e-scholarship program. It's an online refereed journal. And I've done everything I can to try to promote this legacy and the projects that I've had with Oxford. For instance, after I wrote a couple of books for Oxford, Albéniz and Granados, and then Turbo was also published by Oxford. But I thought, I want others to have the opportunity I have had. I was able to break the ice at Oxford. I want others to be able to do this too. So already in 2005, I approached their very visionary editor, Suzanne Ryan, with
Yes.
the idea of establishing a series, The Currents in Latin American and Iberian Music. And she saw the value in that. And so I became the not only the founder, but the series editor from 2005 to 2016. Then Oxford had a new project that I proposed to them and they decided to undertake. So we turned the series over to Alejandro Madrid, who's a leading Hispanist at the Harvard University. He's now the series editor, doing a fantastic job. The series is still flourishing, still going strong. I'm very pleased with that. And but then I proposed to Oxford a Grove Dictionary because I thought, well, we got Grove dictionaries on opera and women composers and jazz, and why not one on Ibero-American music? So I proposed this to them. It took a long time. The gestation took several years, but finally it was born, and now it's an online resource with 11 volumes devoted to different geographical areas. Each volume has its own editor, a specialist in that area. It includes Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Caribbean, Central America, South America, and of course Portugal and Spain. So 11 volumes. I'm the editor in chief, and then we have 11 area editors. And it's already online. It's a work in progress. It's going to take several years. There's a lot of territory to cover. But in all of these ways, I've tried to promote this legacy, to stimulate and encourage scholars to support my colleagues and my friends and other scholars in every way that I possibly can, because I can't do this myself. It's ridiculous, and
Yeah.
I
So
we need a whole army of people doing this, and now we have that, and by God, we're making huge strides.
yeah, absolutely. So, beside your own scholarship, you have been the initiator and the magnet, whatever you want to call it, of many projects, including, as you mentioned, but I want to repeat it, the Center for Latin American and Iberian Music at University of California at
Yes,
Riverside, and also the book series at
yes, Oxford.
Oxford, and now the Iberian Music Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians. So all these things are, and of course the journal Diagonal, which is
Yes.
fantastic. I have
Thank you.
participated in some of your projects one way or the other,
Oh,
and I've always felt that it was an honor to be part of some of these
Well, thank you.
initiatives,
I should mention something that provided some inspiration, perhaps in a negative way, for what I've done. 1992 was the quincentenary. It was the 500th anniversary of a very controversial event, of course, Columbus's first voyage to what was to him a new world. It wasn't a new world to the people who'd been living here for thousands of years. But it was interesting. Uh, some of us Hispanists proposed a special panel to the American Musicological Society for their national meeting, and they just weren't interested at all. It just wasn't on their radar. Total indifference. So that inspired me to work towards giving more visibility to this legacy, to this heritage, and others too began to work hard. The great scholar Bill Summers established um, an Ibero-American music study group at AMS that would meet independently of the main program, and so we began to have an annual presence and could exert some influence and gain some
Yes,
respectability. And now, if anyone looks at the program of the American Musicological Society's national meeting, it's amazing how many papers deal with Ibero-American music.
yeah,
Iberian and Latin American music or
yes. And
Luso-Hispanic music. It's incredible now. I mean, we have gone mainstream. We're now mainstream. And
I lived through that
you
transformation
know
of
all
the
about this.
American Musicological Society. It was it was very, very, very uh, how should I say that, conservative or in before the 90s, and then in the 90s with
Yeah,
William Summers from Dartmouth
yeah.
College, as you know, and with you and
And
many
you,
other people, it started opening up. But this is actually a very interesting topic that we could talk a little bit if you want.
yes,
A way to put this would be a short version of what I'm trying to ask you is how has musicological scholarship on the one hand and teaching in general changed in the last 30 years? Because right now, of course, we have things that we didn't have. LGBT, queer, post-colonial, all that stuff did not exist 30 years ago as we when you were starting and when I was starting, you know. But even things which were much more inoffensive, like Iberian studies, more inoffensive, so to speak, than let's say queer studies, which is more of a rupture in but even those Iberian studies were suppressed kind of. And how does scholarship and also teaching?
yes. Let me share a couple of Stevenson stories with you. He was an incredible genius, but very eccentric. And but he told
Yes.
me some stories that shed a lot of light on this subject. One was this. He said when he became a musicologist and decided to focus on Spanish music and Latin American music, it was at a time when the discipline, in the late 40s, when the discipline was still dominated by German and Austrian scholars, because they invented the discipline of musicology, okay? So it's not a surprise that they would elevate their own musical tradition to the top spot and then relegate everyone else to the margins. So, and many of them fled Europe and came to the United States, and musicology flourished here as a discipline. So we owe them a huge debt of gratitude. But what Stevenson told me was that when he set out to be a musicologist, the discipline was still very much dominated by these people who were immersed in the Austro-Germanic tradition. And he said, he decided to focus on Cristobal de Morales, the great 16th century Spanish composer. Why? Because Spanish Renaissance was the only Spanish music that these German scholars respected. They didn't respect anything after 1600 or Victoria, they didn't respect it. So that's where he had to start. I thought, wow. And now I'm going to write a dissertation on Albanian. Boy, I'm really taking a big chance, but that chance obviously paid off, as he knew it would. But that could happen only at that time. If I'd tried to do it in the 80s or 70s, no, I'd be unemployed right now. So, or that's one story that he told me. The other thing he told me once, he had a giant grin on his face, and I said, "What's so funny?" He said, "Well, we just had a faculty meeting, and I proposed that I teach a course on Elvis Presley." And they were scandalized. And I said, this was, over 30 years ago. And I'm thinking now, no one would bat an eye. Why? Well, because of people like Susan McClary. Maybe I didn't agree with everything she said, but she really opened up the discipline endings and writing about Madonna and writing about human sexuality. Hello, yeah, human sexuality is hugely important. And the fact that someone may have been gay is hugely important. One of the first AMS we heard, which was again over this earth, might be 35 years ago, was Handel gay and does it matter? Well, we don't know for sure, but does it matter? Yes, it definitely matters. Was Schubert gay or maybe bisexual? And was Tchaikovsky gay? Well, it's against the law to say this in Russia now, but yeah, he was definitely gay, no doubt about it. How about Copland? Definitely gay. And does it matter? You bet it matters. And so human sexuality is crucial to who and what we are, not just as human beings, but as creators, as people who write music and books and painting and so forth. Let's talk about Da Vinci and Michelangelo. So, yeah, the discipline has opened up and has changed a lot. How does this affect our teaching? Well, our teaching has to reflect these developments. The reasons they hired me at the University of Kansas was that I would be able to teach a course on the music of Latin America. And that would be cross-listed with Latin American studies. Or that was 1993. But they recognized that the cultural landscape of our country was changing. The politics have changed with the increasing percentage of our population that has Hispanic ancestry. Knock, knock. They want to know about their heritage. So I developed a course on the music of Latin America that included not just classical music, but also folk and popular styles. And one of the experiences I most cherish as a teacher is once I was playing, we studied the Trio Romantico, the Mexican Trio Romantico, and he'd been listening to Bésame Mucho by Los Panchos. And after class, a young woman came up to me. She said, well, I have Mexican ancestry, and this is the music my grandfather listened to. And she said, I always thought it was kind of corny and I didn't like it, but now I understand why he likes it, and I like it too. And I thought, not bad for Walter Aaron Clark from Minneapolis, Minnesota, that I was able to help this young woman connect with her incredibly rich cultural legacy, of which she should be immensely proud. And I say that as a human being, as a member of the same species, Homo sapiens, we're all members of the same species, for crying out loud. Let's celebrate our differences, but realize that they pale in comparison to our commonalities.
Well, this is a great sentence, Walter. Um, let's celebrate our differences, but they don't even compare to our commonalities, which are much, much bigger. I wish everyone had that humanist spirit
Which
Uh,
explains why I could grow up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, surrounded by the Beer Barrel Polka, which is a wonderful piece, and retreat to my bedroom and practice a choro by Villa Lobos, and then something inspired by, Mexican folk song by Ponce, and then practice the Soleares.
a
Because hello,
Malagueña.
a Malagueña, because hello, all right, maybe I don't have any Luso-Hispanic ancestry, but I'm a member of the same species and the same music that inspired and enriched their lives inspires and enriches my life.
Well, I
It's
can tell you
actually
that
not that distant.
this conversation has greatly enriched my life, and I hope to be in touch in the future. I know that we will because we
Oh,
always have
yes.
you and I always have something going on together.
Yes, we do.
And I want to thank you very much for dedicating this time to me and to maybe someone who will watch this video. It's been a great pleasure to have this conversation.
Well, you're most welcome. I'm very honored to have been able to spend this time with you and to talk to you about things that are of importance to both of us. And if anyone has a question or something I can help them with, I'm more than happy to correspond. Just email me at walter.clark@UCR, walter.clark@ucr.edu. Be
Yes,
happy to help any way that I can. And we should also mention that a special issue of Diagonal is coming out early next year, devoted to Paco de Lucia and flamenco, with
absolutely.
because of a conference organized by you and your
Yes,
foundation, devoted to this supremely great genius,
yes, yes,
whose
yes,
music has inspired and delighted me for so many years, and along with millions of other people.
yes. No, his music touched so many segments of
Mm.
society: classical music, pop music, flamenco
Yep.
music,
Yep.
so jazz, you
Yes.
know.
Because he
So
drew from all of those sources to he didn't just transform flamenco guitar, he transformed the whole art of flamenco.
absolutely, absolutely. Anyway, Walter, so thank you so much for spending
Well,
time with me.
it's been a
And
pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
it's been great having this conversation. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Goodbye.
Goodbye.